Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Basis Project at the Black Swan. This is a unique opportunity to hear a very established, well-established and veteran UFO researcher. It goes back to the sort of era when I was starting, to the 1970s. He's done an extensive amount of work. Hopefully you'll be able to talk about the Lake District as well. David Moncoeur is an established researcher, one of the few who've managed to survive. There's quite a few of us, again, I don't like to keep going back to that theme. Anyway, David, come to the stage at the Black Swan and take it away.
All right, thanks. Right. First of all, I'd like to mention getting a 6-year studies in English literature. Is this sounding?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is coming across. Everybody hearing me? Away at the back. So the Scottish education used to have a thing of doing a first year at university during high school, and I got the 6-year studies in English literature. So that was supposed to be for precocious pupils, and it was difficult getting a job. The railways are very independent of, they like to be totally independent, and I got a job in the railways in 1980, May 1980. So basically, travelling for nothing all the rest of my life from the age of 25 onwards was quite interesting. Plus, I was promoted in 1989, so I also had a slightly above average rate of pay, and to exploit the promotion, I deliberately put myself on constant night shift, so I was more or less doing exactly what I wanted from day to day. So I was looking quite well off from about 1990. So I think that maybe has worried a few authorities. It's not that my life's been without interference from the authorities, but I just happen not to be dead, unlike Max Spier and certain other researchers. Quite a lot of ufologists have died in mysterious circumstances, and those who are not alive, like Phil Mantle and Stanton Friedman, you'd be amazed by the extent to which you become suspicious of them and whether they've been got at. And they induced to work for the government and deliberately suppress the UFO subject and maintain confusion as a favour for the military. I mean, Phil Mantle is just really obviously working for the government. I didn't think at first it would be that. It was more or less that he was just a bit over-enthusiastic and over-cautious. But I have become suspicious of Philip Mantle through his interactions with Colin Woolford, who's backing the alien autopsy film as genuine. And it's not so much whether your opinion is of the alien autopsy is whether it's genuine or not. It's just obvious that Phil Mantle is behaving suspiciously on that page. Anyway, the most interesting things regarding my research, I suppose, through Miles, we both have a friend whose pseudonym is Nicola Lisa Williams. We do know her real name. I think she's used that pseudonym for so long it's almost useless as a pseudonym, but nevertheless we'll continue to call her Nicola Lisa Williams. She wrote a book called Occam's Razor, which I think is a very useful book to have. It depicts her experience of alien abduction, and at the time we knew her, she had two perfectly circular bald patches at the apex of her cranium as a sign that something, a physical sign that something strange had happened to her. So, I mean, there was that physical sign. Nicola Lisa Williams, by the way, was quite a well-known personality in the 1980s. Maybe more 1970s, as she was the youngest ever person to join Mensa. Do you all know what Mensa is? And you know the methods of determining whether you join it. The tests are made more and more difficult year after year after year after year. They must maintain only a small proportion, and they keep the tests increasingly difficult. So it was quite impressive for a 16-year-old girl to become a Mensa member, and they immediately gave her quite a good position in Mensa as quite, a highly paid secretary for them. Well, the thing about, you maybe would think, or maybe you've instinctively wondered whether in the process of abducting humans, aliens would express interest in our most brilliant minds. So, should it come as some surprise that Nicola Lisa Williams is someone who believes she's been abducted by aliens and is describing similar things like the aliens coming through the walls and stuff? So that is what the two trichological extractions from the apex of her cranium, resulting in the perfect circular bald patches, are about. So Miles and I knew her, and Nicola Lisa Williams put me in touch with Ron Adams, also a Mensa member, by the way. I think that's how they got to know each other, because they were meeting each other at the Mensa meetings, which were held in Angel Islington in the early 1980s. And they became very friendly. And Ron was running a bookshop at the time, a paranormal orientation type of thing of bookshop. And Nicola was really keen on his bookshop and bought quite a few books from it. So there's Nicola putting me in touch with Ron. That's in the early 1990s. That's me coming into the picture, coming into Nicola Lisa Williams's and Ron Adams' life. So Nicola puts me in touch with Ron Adams, and I used my railway pass to come down on a train from Edinburgh to London and put myself up in a hotel in those days. I met Ron Adams, his wife, and one of his sons, who was called Steve. I think the younger of the two sons. So the thing about the totally civilian family, Adams family, was they were allowed to be the only civilian family living amongst the generals of what was then always referred to as US Air Force Bentwaters. It's now called RAF, or has reverted to being RAF Bentwaters, but it was during the Cold War, for the reasons of the Cold War, called US Air Force Bentwaters, the military base which is just north of London and has Rendlesham Forest right next to it. So do most of you know that there was some sort of incident late December 1980? Without getting into arguments as to what the dates were, and I'm a bit suspicious of the dates supplied by Ian Redpath. I think the dates of the general incident are the 27th into the 28th of December, 28th into the 29th, and the 29th into the 30th, or into the morning of the 30th of December 1980. That's my opinion, and that agrees with Brenda Butler. So are we all following this so far? So 1970 to 1976, the Adams family were living in Binghall Lane amongst the US Air Force Bentwaters military generals. And as Ron sat talking to me at his home at Southgate, near Southgate Tube, I think, Southgate Tube Station, he sat saying there were American military generals all the way up the street to my right and American military generals all the way down the street to my left. They were just all over the place. The military generals became the total society of the Adams family. So over the years, they began going to the anniversary dues, the children's parties, each other's children's parties, they seeing the New Year and going to Christmas parties, Christmas presents all over the place, So you get the idea as to how totally friendly the Adams family had become with the military generals during the night from 1970 to 1976. With the US Air Force Bentwaters generals. And when Ron left to start the bookshop, having always been as a profession a technical book writer, so you've got the slight advantage of being a book writer. You write a book and it's always taken on by the universities year after year after year. You see how advantageous that is if you get chosen by the universities. Ron was lucky in that sense and was a fairly well-off fellow. So from 1970 to the 1980s, he ran the bookshop. I think it was destroyed by fire, and there was a bit of suspicion as to what happened there. Address was in Angel Islington. So anyway, I went down to meet Ron, and by the way, they carried on. Adams family carried on meeting the USAF Bentwaters generals. The society carried on happening. They carried on driving back and forward between Suffolk and London, between Binghall Lane and all that. Binghall Lane is the name of the street where the American military generals were housed. From what actually happened, that was mysterious. The first indication of mysteriousness was from late December 1980. All of a sudden, with no explanation, Ron and his family never heard anything from the military generals ever again. So without getting into what had happened and whether it was alien beings or whether it was a holographic projection, whatever had happened, something very, very big, historically speaking, had obviously happened. And as Ron began hearing, as the 80s drew on, and Ron's family began hearing that there had been some sort of incident late December 1980, they began thinking, oh, is that to do with the reason that we never heard from our very good friends ever again? Well, obviously it probably was. Now, as the decade of the 1980s wore on into the 1990s, Ron, his wife, the two sons, and one of the girlfriends visiting the son during the 1970s, and now a wife of the son, all began discovering they all had believed they'd been abducted by alien beings while staying at US Air Force Bentwaters, which made the Adams case sound really, really big to me, and nobody's ever investigated it, and I felt a bit disappointed. Well, Ron died a few months after I'd met him, but I still thought that his wife would attempt something, would attempt a publication, or maybe even Steve. Steve, seemed to be the younger of the two sons, and he's the only son I spoke with. He definitely was too traumatized. He wanted the regular abductions to stop. He hated it. He described the other world he seemed to be taken to. In technological terms, his description is absolutely incredible, that he's been repeatedly taken from here on Earth to another planet many light years away and back. The question of space and time, which the extraterrestrials have conquered, does make the description incredibly unbelievable. So the technology is just absolutely fantastic. There's nothing believable about it. There's no point in thinking you won't sound mad. If you try to describe aliens like coming through the walls as like ghosts, like our image of ghosts, you just will sound completely nuts. So, well, there was Steve. Steve, the young son, was just generally traumatized and had a sudden fear of spiders after the abductions. That's one of the people I met who had a sudden fear of spiders after abduction. Obviously, some type of extraterrestrial race does look quite insectoid, and I suspect it's probably the praying mantis type, which are often described as having 6 limbs, not so much 8, but 6 limbs. I'm inclined to think that it's the praying mantis that's resulting in the insectoid trauma. Around about 1996, I became very friendly with a woman called Helen Mason in Edinburgh, and she's Australian. And an ex-boyfriend of hers, though an ex-boyfriend in the sense that he died in Australia, did also seem to have been abducted by aliens and also exhibit a terror of spiders. So she was interested in me describing the Ron Adams experience. So the effect on her ex-boyfriend, and it's not very good saying an ex-boyfriend when the reason he's an ex-boyfriend is that he died. But anyway, her boyfriend in Adelaide, I think, he was abducted and he just simply seemed to keep on dying. He's just ill forever, for the rest of his life, from the point in time at which he was abducted. The doctors could do absolutely nothing. He just died and died and died, and that's all her memory is. She remembers him describing the light in the sky, and that's about it. The terror of spiders, sudden terror of spiders, and that's basically the description that Helen Mason gave me. Another friend in Edinburgh, an Edinburgh-based person called Arthur Hislop, also believes he's been abducted, and he's a really big, powerful bloke that you wouldn't mess with, but he did also exhibit a terror of spiders after being abducted by aliens, and exhibited other similar things, like being suddenly technically proficient and very good at maths without having been good before that. He didn't seem like that type of arty mathematical type, but after the abduction he was suddenly a lot more intellectually capable. That's also similar to Ron Adams, who believed he was much more intellectually capable, and blamed the abduction by aliens during the 1960s on his ability to get into Mensa. Now, Ron was 65 when I met him, so again, I think he was 65, still 65 when he died, and that was 1994. So lots happened in that time, and I guess I'd like to go on to mentioning using my railway pass to meet Sharon Larkin, and what it is that Sharon Larkin has in common with the abductee called Alan Godfrey. Have you all heard of Alan Godfrey? Alan Godfrey, the police officer who was the police officer who looked at the body of Zygmunt Adamski in 1980. The Zygmunt Adamski case was the guy found lying on a heap of coal. Remember that case? It was as if a UFO had plucked him like from above, and there was absolutely no dirt on his body. You would think if he'd scrambled up to the top, his hands would be all filthy, covered in black dust. I've been down there, I've looked at the area, I've looked at Turmorden, I've talked to a relative who's still very upset in like the 2000s, and I convinced him that it did still have to be it was probably more likely an abduction. But Alan Godfrey was the first police officer to look at Zygmunt Adamski's body with a police officer called Peter Sutcliffe. Well, Alan usually jokes about that aspect when he does talks to a large crowd. Not that Alan does many talks to a large crowd, but it's relatively odd coincidence. Anyway, a few years after looking at the body of Zygmunt Adamski, police officer Alan Godfrey became an abductee himself. Was abducted by aliens. Now, he believed that, and his medical x-rays, up to the point, I think not many people know about Alan Godfrey being unable to have children up to the point in time at which he was abducted. He was unable to sire children, would be a more logical way of putting it. After the abduction, his wife became pregnant, which is like a bit strange. So Alan Godfrey went to hospitals, got his x-rays out, and they compared, and he got re-x-rayed again, and the doctors were absolutely astounded at the total perfection of the surgery, which would need to have been performed on Alan's anatomy. Alan had been unable to have children through being battered very badly by delinquent youths in Leeds. He'd been really kicked in, the genitals had been absolutely smashed in, and he was rendered unable to have children. So he thought he was never going to have children. So that is what was absolutely perfectly restored by the extraterrestrials. So when people go on about photographic evidence, I often feel like countering to people, well, anybody, anytime can go and compare the x-rays of Alan Godfrey's reproductive anatomy. Anyway, Sharon Larkin's mother is a female version of that. I don't know what's in the aliens' minds about giving us access to absolutely incredible technology which would which would repair so many people's bodies. But this photographic evidence sets me against those who think that the Rendlesham Forest incident of late December 1980 was the military generals playing about with holographic projections. I don't think it was that. I think it's a physical landing of an extraterrestrial craft, aliens getting off and talking with the military generals, and a whole lot of political complications arising. We'll go into that later. I'll talk about Sharon Larkin's mother. Absolutely nobody knows about this except me, Sharon Larkin, and her mother, basically, and maybe the father of Sharon Larkin. So Sharon Larkin, specifically, the UFO investigator of Cumbria, shouldn't really exist. Her mother had been unable to have children. The womb was the wrong way around or something. I'm not like a gynecologist or anything, but the womb is the wrong way around. I know the word ectopic, but that's the word that conveys the baby coming down upside down.
Because when it starts fertilising, the baby starts to grow, and you use gestation in the tube, in the fallopian tubes, yes.
And it is upside down when you come, feet first. Yes, anyway, she had an inverted womb and had been declared by the doctors unable to have children. So one day, she was near to the Sellafield nuclear power station and remembers seeing a light in the sky, and that's it. She's not been hypnotically regressed to see whether she's been abducted. But soon after seeing the light in the sky, she became pregnant with Sharon Larkin, the woman that I've met quite a few times in Cumbria. So they did the same thing of getting all the x-rays out absolutely incredulously, and the doctors, again, were absolutely astounded. So the National Health Service of Britain must always have known about these cases, Alan Godfrey's reproductive anatomy and Sharon Larkin's mother's reproductive anatomy being damaged or something. And then after the abduction, the aliens seem to have cured them of their inability to have children, and so Sharon Larkin was born. So I think that's pretty solidly demonstrative that aliens are abducting us with incredible technology. So I suppose I'd get asked my opinion as to why they're not disclosing this, and I'm inclined to think that extreme right-wing types, the topmost people on Earth, don't want to lose control. They don't want to describe the social organisation of the extraterrestrials, which I think is without money. You know, they are socially organised without the need for money. It's a lot more sensible. It's not as damaging economically. Meanwhile, the companies here on Earth are frantically fracking the Earth to rip into it to maintain profits, and that is quite rightly looking like absolute insanity to visiting extraterrestrials, and the extraterrestrials are arguing with our leaders, or at least the people in control. I certainly haven't elected any of them, so I've not voted for any of them, but that's basically what I think the scenario is. Rich people beginning to interfere with the disclosure process is generally the way I'd put it, a class situation. To put it maybe as Marx might have put it, the proletariat are looking up in innocent wonder at the extraterrestrial craft, and the rich are looking at the extraterrestrial craft in absolutely putrid terror of the loss of their power and the discovery of their corrupt activity, like the mysterious deaths of the scientists and all that. Anything you'd like me to go on to, Miles?
Well, what about those scientists?
The scientists, I did go into the scientists.
No, but I mean, there's been new information about that. What you also were at the time talking about the people in media as well.
I did compare the deaths of media personalities, but quite less well-known ones.
Yeah, we're talking about people in the actual industry.
That in 1990, January 1990, a book was published called Open Verdict, 25 Mysterious Deaths in the Defence Industry. So the writer of that is called Tony Collins. I think it's the only book he's published. He's very interested in the death of the 25 IRA experts in the helicopter that smashed into the mountains near
Isle of Skye.
Near Machrihanish. No, Machrihanish is where they crashed.
No, it was Isle of Skye, which is near Machrihanish.
Well, it was there. Oh, that's very interesting.
So that's Jane has just said that, one of your friends' cousins.
Well, stick with... I started working on the mysterious deaths of the scientists with a student at Edinburgh, at Heriot Watt University in electrical engineering. He was in his third year in January 1990, and he was very interested. It happened purely by coincidence to be the son of the most highly placed police officer in the whole of Scotland. As Ron became interested in the mysterious deaths, and as I found out more and more information, we were kind of constantly talking with each other, and he became a very good friend. I'll just say his name was Ron. He's a bit nervous of being known as having supplied good information about this. But to describe one incident, it's really that we did feel we fell under surveillance, experienced some surveillance phenomena. I told Ron I was interested in the phenomena of reverse wave propagation. It's because Ron and I were discussing decoding brainwaves massive distances, and Ron was quite credulous of that. I was a bit surprised. I asked him because an old woman in 1988 had left Blackpool with a gun, intent on shooting a producer for the BBC. And she was, of course, described as absolutely mad, but she was... She managed to shoot the hand of a guard outside the BBC, but it made a front page story. She was in her 80s, I think. Forget her name, Elsie. But anyway, that's basically what I asked Ron about. Could the brainwaves be decoded? And he surprised me by his answer. He said, no, it wouldn't surprise me if you could listen in on people's thoughts in Britain through a decoder in Australia. People don't know about the nature of human brainwaves. They're longitudinal. They're not like that. They're more pulsed. They're more like pulsing beads, Yeah, well, probably more non-directional or omnidirectional. It's a little bit...
Talk about the Telstar satellite transmitting.
No, he didn't talk to me about that, but he talked...
The Telstar satellite was
yeah.
brainwaves to the States. They changed it to the States and brought them back.
Yeah, well, I think it seems like they can decode our brainwaves at an absolutely incredible distance, and maybe that relates to the UFOs' reasons for being able to jump huge distances. But to get to the point, I just simply called the ability to communicate with someone, to put a message into someone's head. I said to Ron that would be called reverse wave propagation. And I said that to Ron because there had been an article about reverse wave propagation in a Scientific American. So he was eager to... students at university are eager to look like enthusiastic about getting the outside world interested in their subject. So he said, well, I'll give you the sheets they're going to give me, about reverse wave propagation when we get the subject. So months went by, and Harriet Watt University students in their third year did not get this lecture on reverse wave propagation, and Ron became a bit curious, and when all the students, at some point, I think around about March 1990, Ron asked his university lecturer that he'd had for the past 3 years, excuse me, sir, with all the other students outside, if this had been witnessed, I'm sure I would have talked to the other students. Ron said when all the other students had gone and he'd stayed behind, he said, excuse me, sir, why aren't we getting reverse wave propagation? And at that, the university lecturer took a terrible fright and stuttered and stammered and said, I can't tell you that. The following day, another lecturer took over the course, the head of department, and the students never saw that lecturer in the university ever again. He seemed to have taken an immediate nervous breakdown, and that told Ron and I that we were definitely being asked about. We could only theorise that university lecturer had been got at by MI5 agents and had been made to feel very frightened and had been asked to inform on Ron. Well, after that, Ron became a bit curious and asked his dad about the mysterious deaths of top scientists. And his dad answered Ron, yes, son, I do know British judges do pass top secret death sentences. When they're doing that, it's done in a small room with a desk more kind of like that. The judge is sitting behind the desk, and the person they think might get a death sentence has walked into the room. The judge has a piece of paper on him with a description of the security leak that they think this guy is. And Ron said 9 times out of 10 in that situation, the judge passes a death sentence. Very occasionally he doesn't, but usually he does pass a death sentence. So from that point on, Ron and I were maybe a bit frightened, and actually we did have a severe disagreement and never talked to each other again, and maybe it was foolish of me, but I could hardly believe what was happening. So I've recounted that on a website, around about 1999 or 2000, developing quite a society of students through doing voluntary work for a cafe that the students frequented, whilst also working for the railways full time, which did make me feel quite well off, because they gave you free meals and stuff. The students were really keen to give me websites and email addresses and things, so their knowledge of computers began rubbing off on me. So I think I became a bit more knowledgeable about websites and emails and the internet than I would be for my age group, characteristic of my age group. So I typed up all that stuff about the reverse wave propagation incident into a website. I'll maybe give interested people that description. But I focused a little bit more on BBC employees' mysterious deaths as well. As I was curious as to whether the BBC deaths were kind of parallelable to the Marconi Scientists, and I think that was right. The death of Kenneth Williams is very mysterious to find out about. You know who I mean? I'm meaning the Carry On guy. It's more mysterious than you expect. He was cremated really quickly. His diary was confiscated immediately by the police. I mean, why confiscate the diary of somebody like Kenneth Williams? Everybody here would think he's not a suspicious person. Well, I think, that is it. They were deliberately talking to people like Kenneth Williams and Jimmy Savile because they have slightly ridiculous images. If you say to someone, Kenneth Williams or Leslie Phillips is working for the CIA, it's got a slightly silly sort of sound to it. I think, well, I was told by people working with the CIA in 1974, they deliberately looked for people with that slightly silly sort of image to manipulate into doing things for them. So, like, I will say, probably you will think it's not very likely, but you're all wrong to think that Jimmy Savile was a paedophile. I was told he was working with the CIA to make people look like, people high up look like they are paedophiles, taking photographs of them and blackmailing them in order to increase American CIA control over the uppermost echelons of British society. That was from the early 70s up until his death. And after his death, I think they were able to blacken Jimmy Savile's image without him being around to object or look absolutely incredulous at what they're saying. I just don't know about these cases like Rolf Harris. I just know that that is what two people working with the CIA told me they were doing. I knew that the Jeremy Thorpe thing, they told me that they were going to frame Jeremy Thorpe as a gay guy plotting to kill his homosexual lover in 1974, and that was the front page news 3 years later. You know, I knew that story was going to be in the pages in the newspapers 3 years before it was in. They told me the reason. The reason was to affect the floating voter. The floating voter tends to vote Tory if they're made uncertain about the images of the Liberal Party and the Labour Party. So they deliberately tarnished the image of the Liberal Party by means of this totally fake story about Jeremy Thorpe, the Liberal leader during the 1980s, 70s, yeah, during the 1970s, 80s. That's what they thought they were doing. It was all rubbish. I knew the whole story about Jeremy Thorpe was just all crap. I even knew the name Norman Scott, who would be the guy claiming that Jeremy Thorpe was going to be trying to assassinate him. And they told me every little bit of that story they were going to put in the papers. And that's all I can say. It was in Stevenson College of Further Education that conversation with those CIA acolytes, for want of a better word, told me all that. They expected me to enthusiastically join them, but after they'd told me all that, I said, no, I don't want to join you. In 1974, they weren't very pleased about that, and that's one thing that happened to me. So I have had quite a mysterious life. Does anybody want to ask anything about that?
I do remember something about Jimmy Savile a long time ago.
Yeah.
He came to talk to where my father was at the air station.
Yes.
And he was the VIP for the air day. And he wanted to preach at the church the next day.
Oh, right.
So I think my family and I went. I was about 16 or something. And I remember, something stood out in his talk when he said, I feel that life is checks and balances.
Yeah.
So I feel that if I do a lot of work for charity, then if I've been a bit naughty sexually, that balances it out. And, in latter time, that has kind of, I've thought of that.
Yeah, well, maybe he was.
Who knows?
Maybe he was that, but maybe an aspect of that made him useful to the American CIA, but I'm sure he was.
1968.
Yes. Well, maybe that was in his character, and obviously it does sound correspondent to what we found out later about him. But I think he was at the same time working with those American CIA agents all the same, and he was useful to them. The word "useful idiot," the term "useful idiot" is basically probably it. He's not all that bright a person, and he just does what people tell him, and that's it. I know. I've read the descriptions of him, like getting up to someone and sticking his tongue down their throat or something. stuff like that. I suspect he was ordered to do that by this American CIA, so they had that in the reports. But anyway, we could go on to something else. The mysterious deaths, anyway, to go on to that, 1987. Well, I have wondered if in 1987, 1987, the 2017 is a bit of an anniversary year of a hell of a lot of anniversaries. There's the most violent storm that ever struck England in 1987, which happened to destroy a lot of Rendlesham Forest, and we were a bit suspicious of that. And it was technically the only time that a storm hit hurricane force. A hurricane is technically to be over 115 miles per hour. They've got this barrier. So if you're in a wind that's 115 miles per hour, that's not a hurricane. The forest being destroyed by the winds that destroyed a lot of Rendlesham Forest was over 115 miles per hour. I think 117 was recorded. So it was technically a hurricane. And I think how many people were killed? Was it about 20 or 5? 5 people were killed, I think, by that forest. Because a lot of damage was done in Kent as well. In Kent, a lot of people's houses were smashed to bits by that hurricane. And if Michael Fish hadn't called the French meteorology report a load of rubbish publicly on television, some people might not have died. But the French had actually tried to tell Britain, we think a hurricane's about to hit you. And we said back, no, that's got to be a load of rubbish. And Michael Fish said on morning television, if you've heard a hurricane's going to hit Britain, don't worry, it's not. And if you, like in the afternoon, like the whole of Kent, 80,000 trees were smashed to bits in a very short period of time, and some of them turned upside down, and 20 houses were smashed to bits and 5 people were killed. Well, anyway, that's one anniversary. It's also the anniversary of the 1947 Roswell UFO crash, which everybody here is probably going to know. And if there's one thing I've often thought should be commemorated, it would maybe be the death of Shani Warren, who died on the 17th of April, 1987, who was found with her mouth gagged, face down in Lake Taplow, her hands tied behind her back with spark plug cables, and her feet tied together. And police, after investigating that a month later or so, announced, we think this is possibly a bizarre suicide. So I think that is like, as the American CIA functionaries said to me in 1974, to deliberately carry out a killing of someone who's in a position to know a lot of sensitive information and actually get the police to announce something totally ridiculous, as they did recently with Gareth Williams. You all know the death of Gareth Williams? The guy found dead in a suitcase. The guy they claimed possibly committed suicide by climbing into a suitcase. Yeah.
My father did that. My father was a forensic pathologist on that.
Oh, he worked on that case. Right. Woman at the front saying her father worked on that case. The forensic pathologist for that case. Did he agree with the police?
Well, I tried to question him, but he's a bit old now, so he doesn't sort of remember things. But
Oh, right, so that's useful.
he didn't work much after that.
Right. Right, well, that forensic pathologist didn't work much.
Back of the hall, the microphone's at the back, if anybody wants to ask.
Well, I want to describe more about the death of Shani Warren, and she was not actually working for Marconi. but was working for a company called Microscope, which was being bought by Marconi for £16 million, which in 1987 was an unprecedented sum of money. So as a secretary for Microscope, she must have been seen as in a sensitive position, and she must have found out something they didn't like. So all of a sudden, a woman who'd just bought a bouquet of flowers to give to her boyfriend and a bottle of champagne to celebrate getting an the decision to get married, and had just finished paying off her Vauxhall, black Vauxhall Astra payments, suddenly decided to drive to the banks of artificial Lake Taplow in Slough and get out and tie her own feet together, gag her own mouth, tie her own hands behind her back with spark plug cables and hop herself into the water without leaving any marks on the sand. So 6 months later, I think it was a News of the World reporter, a female News of the World reporter, tried to enact what the Thames police had claimed had possibly happened, and obviously couldn't. Now, when she did that, she noticed that her helpers had flat shoes and didn't leave any marks on the sand. And she said that to the police, but she got stonewalled on it. They just ignored her, basically. It's also not well known, and not in Tony Collins' report about the Shani Warren death, although he did do a lot of work on it, that the police did ask an expert on knots, presumably a scout, or something. Could you possibly tie that knot behind your back? And he said that particular knot I could not tie behind my back. So what do you do with that information? But they still carried on with it as a probable suicide. The knot experts seemed to be induced to say a few months later, well, maybe she could have tied her hands behind her back, but it just is deliberately improbable. It's a totally ridiculous case, and I've often thought that the death of Shani Warren should result in a commemorative thing in itself. And I said to Tony Collins, in an email, and I spoke to him over the phone, I think the fact that TV personalities are like across the lake from where Shani was found dead might be, might be to do with it. I think they know something. Well, that was just my opinion. Shani Warren, on the other hand, I wondered about the similarity of her name. The similarity to the name Larry Warren, the guy called Larry Warren. You all know who Larry Warren is? The whistleblower on seeing the small beings with cat-like slits for eyes in Rendlesham Forest, late December 1980. Also, the way that she was murdered, the week before, David Greenhalgh was very, very badly hurt. But they think thrown off a bridge, but he wasn't killed. And he was a Marconi worker. I don't know if he's dead now, but he was thrown off a kind of technical bridge, not a bridge to be used much by the public, and smashed onto the railway tracks. But he managed to get himself away from the tracks and got taken to hospital. And the nurses... the nurses who tended to David Greenhalgh, who lived round the corner from Shani Warren, were experienced special branch operatives turning up at the hospital and violently ordering them to never mention anything of what this man might tell them. So there was that very mysterious behaviour as well. So that had happened a week before Shani was found dead in Lake Taplow. So obviously it was connected. That in open verdict, 3 scientists, inside 2 months, sat down and decided to electrocute themselves. 3 scientists, 3 Marconi scientists electrocuted themselves by tying electric wires to their teeth and then plugging themselves into the mains. So you see that it's a really weird thing to get into is the mysterious deaths of the Marconi scientists. Or if they appeared not to be Marconi scientists, they turned out to be working for Marconi, but like for Esoms or Plessy. But Plessy and Esoms seem to be allowing Marconi to disguise certain activities which really were for Marconi, GEC Marconi, I suppose, by then. So, pardon? Yes, the David Kelly death. That's one of the dead microbiologists, isn't it? And there's a hell of a lot of dead microbiologists.
Weapons Iraq
Was it? Weapons specialist for the Iraq War. I can't say I know as much about the David Kelly death because it isn't one I particularly read into. It's
Gulf War one.
Pardon?
Gulf War.
The Gulf War, a Gulf War one. Possibly you guys know more about that specific death. I do remember the thing of the police helicopter supposedly flying over. That was reported by Robin Ramsey flying over David Kelly's dead body. Well, they didn't pick it up. Supposedly, they claim they didn't see, with their infrared sensors able to pick up warm objects, which are specially designed to pick up people's bodies moving about. They claim they didn't spot David Kelly's body lying down there. And it was only reported by Robin Ramsey in his Lobster magazine. That's another thing you could download. It's only on online now, and used to be once every 2 months when it was on the shop shelves. But Robin Ramsey's lore of information is very useful and very good, and something I can recommend here. Like 1987, there's quite a lot that 1987 is commemorating, I think. Well, the number 7, 2017, is making me think of. Right, somebody's got a question.
You mentioned Jimmy Savile and you mentioned the Jimmy Savile and institutional child abuse in this country. I was wondering if there's any connection with or how they're getting access to these children, and if there's any connection with some of the recent stories in the newspaper about some of the Asian child sex grooming gangs in the north of England, or if you've had any information about that, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think there probably are such criminal gangs, but regarding with what I've read in the papers about Jimmy Savile, I basically think that the hundreds of instances they've referred to, I've wondered if it's just all crap. They're just writing that down, and you're just reading words on a page, and you've got no ability. I mean, nobody here could check out 387 claims or however many it is. And they're just chancing it on the fact that none of you can check such statements out. They're completely ridiculous, and might be just a hell of a lot of lies.
Basically saying people that have given testimony from the care industry, who have experienced abuse in the care industry, they're just lying. Why would they be making these stories up then?
Well, is there a film of them saying all that?
Actually, I have got one story there.
Yeah.
This was a girl I was treating, actually.
Yes.
And she was very friendly with her hairdresser, who had been working, who'd got himself into one of these, big hairdressers in London. Yeah. But he had been in a children's home.
Yes.
And he asked her one day whether she would come with him. He said, "If you come with me, I'll be safe." So she agreed because, fine, it seemed like an adventure. And this car came and collected them, and they went to a flat in Belgravia somewhere. And she was appalled. And they walked into this flat, and she recognised actors, judges, politicians. They were all off their heads on drugs and whatever. And there were endless boys there, and they were all having sex, and this boy had been told, you know, you've got to come, because he had been involved with it since he was a child. So this was another time he was required to go, and he felt his life would be in danger if he didn't go, but he felt that if he took her, he'd be seen there and he could drift through and not be seen. So that was one witness. I can't remember the girl.
Well, I suppose maybe the CIA, to answer, both of you are watching for people that have weak personalities, and maybe they're using them, and possibly quite a lot of stories are true, and maybe once they've started manipulating somebody, I do think they must have manipulated Jimmy Savile, but at the same time he's had a weak personality that has been committing some sexual crimes, and he's been therefore like the useful idiot that they thought he was. So possibly quite a lot has happened, and I can't really say they have or not, but they kind of super exaggerated it all, and maybe that's what happened. But I am sure that Jimmy Savile must have helped the CIA, partly because I'm interested in the true story that the bank job, my nose is running, the bank job, have you any of you seen the film called The Bank Job? The true story that it's based on was only in the papers, thanks. The true story the bank job is based on, and was only in the papers for about 6 days, was robbers breaking into a bank, but they broke into a particularly difficult bank vault that the authorities thought would be broken into. So they must have spent quite a bit of time on breaking into it. This film was film called The Bank Job, has Saffron Bowers in it and Jason Statham. It is a very good film. It got good reviews. But the true story was that when the robbers broke into the vault, there was no money in the vault. But what was in the vault, in thousands of little trays, were photographs of rich and powerful people. Thousands of photographs in compromising situations, like with children or suggesting they're gay and stuff like that. So it interested me when I heard about that story recently through the film being made on it, to think back to what the American CIA functionaries were telling me. So like there's a combination of truth and exploitation, I suppose, to increase power, but they have the American CIA has a hell of a big thing of increasing power, increasing their power and control, as they do in Britain as well. The whole capitalist thing does have a big thing of increasing power, and extraterrestrials seem to interfere with that or something. Anyway, would anybody like to ask another question?
Don't be shy.
I've got one thing you might be interested in.
Okay.
My mother's information about, little green men,
Yeah.
which a lot of people don't believe in. And I've never seen one, and I hope I never do, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
However, my first sort of thing was Whitley Strieber talking about it. And I actually believed him, and I read his books, and I wouldn't have done if I hadn't read his books. However, what my explanation was that, isn't it Paul Hellyer, who used to be the
Canadian?
Yeah, the Canadian chap, yeah. He's on record as saying he thought that we were dealing, or they were dealing in his time, with between 3 and 12 alien species. Anyway, the explanation that I've been given was that those people who are coming from our sister planet, they've been doing this for a very, 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 very long time. And they were finding that people were being killed. It's dangerous travelling through space, and they were losing people. So they experimented with robots and things, and of course found that they were never really that good. So they came up with the idea of mixing human sperm, or an egg, with various animals and creatures, bringing it to full term with some woman, or, like one of us, really. And then they produce these creatures who have no they either remove their genitalia or they breed them so that they don't have them, thinking that when they've done this, they won't breed and so they won't cause any trouble. But the trouble is, once you create life, it goes back into the partially computerized system for a planet. And they have actually found that as a result, they've not been able to have children. And some of the women who are having children are having monsters, which is why they've been coming to us and finding out why, because we have their genealogy, why we're still having children. So, which is why they have been using us to sometimes have children, or mixing things with us, or experimenting on us. And that's the explanation that I have. You know, who knows? I've never seen anybody, and I hope I never do, but
yeah, I know.
It's plausible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting story and an interesting reason. Maybe one day we'll get to meet these little people from far away.
Hopefully not.
You don't want to. Supposedly they smell... Well, the greys supposedly smell really bad.
Do you know, actually, interestingly enough, that was one of the things that Whitley Strieber said. He said when he first found himself in one of these places, he said it was not very clean, and there was some discarded overalls, and there was a strange smell. And he said he was so frightened. It was so otherworldly. He was sitting in this, strapped to this chair. Well, he was in a chair, unable to move, and he felt that the creature who was experimenting on him was female, but there was nothing about her that was female. And he was aware of her saying into his mind telepathically, "What can we do to stop you screaming?" He was so out of it. And he said, "Let me smell you." And she put her arm up for him to smell. And he said it was there was nothing human about it. There was just this strange smell.
Yeah, I've thought about how dirty the greys are. There's a few reports of that. The reason for this is the difference in the anatomy. The description of the extraterrestrial anatomy, the greys. This is the description of the greys, not the description of the Tau Ceti. But the reason for the greys are the so-called zeta reticulans. They have 3 Venus tracts. This is according to another source, and he doesn't want anybody to know. He told me this, and he's become a more well-known person in the present day. Around about October 1991, I met somebody who described the anatomy of the greys. So they have 3 Venus tracts, is the way he put it. These are the words he used. So Venus tract number 1 absorbs nutrients. So they've got millions of little holes all over each of their bodies. They immerse themselves in the liquid, usually the blood of the cattle. They drain all the blood from the cattle into vats. They jump into the vats and absorb the blood as best they can through these vesicles in their skin, which then transports nutrients throughout their body. So the anatomy is very different. They have a central organ, not very like, as opposed to our heart. They have a thing that sort of does everything. Venus tract number 2, the American military describes as more or less blood, like our veins, more or less normal veins. Venus tract number 3 is like the crapping system. They crap throughout their skin, so like the grey can be standing talking to you and it craps right in front of you and it smells really bad when it does that. Which probably suggests that the greys with their webbed fingers, should be in a liquid matrix, in a sea or a pond, swimming about, and when they crap, it all just washes off. And they're not aware of that. So the mouth isn't very much like a mouth. But do you all know the story of Dwight D. Eisenhower, American President Eisenhower in 1956, meeting an alien grey? It's reported in Timothy Good's Alien Liaison. So it's not one original to me, but Timothy Good hasn't had the description of alien anatomy that I have had.
It was a fairly impenetrable book as well.
Yeah, but as President Eisenhower was meeting an alien grey with lots of dignitaries around him and 2 other extraterrestrial species on either side of the grey. The grey started emitting this pus through its skin. And Eisenhower immediately went, "Oh God, the smell!" And that is a legitimate story, and it does sound supportive of my military source for the description of the extraterrestrial anatomy. Does that sound convincing to you guys? So that is the description of the anatomy, and that is what is happening to the mutilated cows.
When humans are working side by side, the greys in their own factories, the greys actually say that we stink.
Yeah, do they? Well, I suppose that's all relative, isn't it? Yeah, they don't hear. I'm interested in the way I did interact over Facebook with a grey, which won't sound very convincing to people. But what seemed convincing to me is the description of the greys captured from the Roswell craft as having no ears. So when I was interacting with the grey in a Facebook situation, I joined it as a human being that you would think you're seeing a human being called Robert France. I thought the pretentiousness that it could hear seemed a little bit strange. I know what it's like to talk to a blind man. We had a blind. I had a blind. One of my grandfather's brothers was blind through the war, and he would pretend he could see like everybody else. So he would say, "That's a lovely forest over there, and these are lovely flowers," and all there was brick walls and concrete houses. He would pretend he could see just like everybody, which I thought, I was aware of that pretense when I was a young child. And the alien grey, when I mentioned music and my favourite music, the grey sounded just similarly pretentious and pretending it could hear, which I thought was strange. So I thought about the anatomical description of the white ant by Eugene Murray. Do any of you know about that? The Soul of the White Ant by Eugene Murray is worth reading. If you all made a note of that, make a note of it. It's a very small book, so it's not a big undertaking.
Soul of the what?
The Soul of the White Ant. Yeah. By Eugene Murray. His surname, I suppose it's the actual origin of the Scottish surname Murray. But the spelling of Murray is M-A-R-A-I-S. You got that? So the French pronunciation of that is Murray. Eugene Murray. He was South African, Afrikaans, but he was a nervous kind of guy. He didn't get on with his Afrikaans friends, which is quite believable, going by what we've heard of the Afrikaans males and their attitudes to the blacks. Anyway, he left and went out into the wilds of South Africa, and he did a particular study of the white ant, which has no senses. It does nothing but have a central nervous system which interprets a bombardment by vibrations, and yet it must see. And the queen, the hive queen of the ant colony, is particularly interesting. In fact, it seemed to dematerialize and
this is very important because they couldn't see any method of how the ant left the nest when it moved.
Yes, that's right. It remits. That's MI5 terminology for the disappearance and reappearance. The thing is, he knew nothing. He swore blind that as the hive queen became too big for the little house that the worker ants made for it, they made another little house for it, and the hive queen would just suddenly appear in it, which he thought was incredibly too strange to believe. So he would mark the Hive Queen with some red marker pen or something to make absolutely sure the Hive Queen appearing in the next one was the same thing. He watched that DMAT remat thing about 42 times, but it seemed to be what was genuinely happening, which does sound incredible that a creature which we won't treat as all that intelligent is doing something that we can't believe and can't understand, yet within its tiny little brain it's doing something that all the time, which is really strange. That's the DMAT remat thing. So even in terms of the Philadelphia experiment, when Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla helped that ship, the Andrew Eldritch, to disappear from Newark dockyards to... it disappeared from Philadelphia dockyards to Newark dockyard and then came back all in a few seconds in 1943. They knew they could DMAT remat things even if they simply had watched The White Ant. But they'll have kept that absolutely top secret. You know that Eugene Marie's work was stolen by Guy de Maupassant. Was it Guy de Maupassant? I think it was Guy somebody. French Guy is G-U-Y. We'd pronounce it Guy. Guy, I think Guy somebody. Can't remember. I thought it was one of the famous writers of the 30s. A very famous writer, and his first name was G-U-Y, French. Maybe you could think of him. Anyway, he tried to act like Eugene Marie's work was his work. So he was very jealous of it. So, which does make it seem at the same time perversely probable that he saw Eugene Marie's work as objectively provable and repeatable, no matter how fantastic it seems. It's a pity I can't remember the name of the French writer that stole his work, though. He wrote a lot of plays. The guy who stole Eugene Marie's work and the work he did with the apes as well, he wrote quite a lot of plays. So I think it was Guy de Maupassant, maybe not. We'll find out later. Anyway, yeah, that's another thing that I checked out. Yes?
Isn't it Guy Maupassant?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Guy de Maupassant. Yeah, de Maupassant. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that is who is connected with the Eugene Marie story. Very interesting stuff to find out about. Any questions? Pardon?
We've got a couple of minutes left.
Okay, does anybody want to ask a question? I didn't realise I'd blabbed for so long. Does anybody have a...
What about the Lake District? You mentioned one particular research.
The Lake District. Well, that is...
our computers got stolen and everything.
It's really the...
Don't want to mention her name unless you want to.
Wait, Sharon Larkin. As I mentioned Sharon Larkin, who is a UFO researcher in Cumbria, or the Lake District, or Cumberland, whichever name you want to call it. Sharon Larkin... I did work on a particular UFO case called the Knott Hill UFO crash. And some of you might think that you haven't heard of that. It happened in Cumbria, quite near to the tiny village of Caldbeck. Very good if you want a vegetarian meal. You'd be amazed how well served you are as a vegetarian in a tiny village called Caldbeck. The thing is, that UFO crash was in March the 4th, 1954. And the first they thought there was just it was an advanced plane or connected with the war, an experimental plane. And one of the people who went up there was a Dr. Cox, I think Brian Cox. That's relatively important. He is still alive, and you could still talk to him, but we think that he had to tend to alien beings and not a crashed Spitfire or something, or whatever. You know, in 1954, maybe that was out of date. They brought two occupants down from the crashed UFO, which is an unusual number. Maybe they could just only get to now. Maybe that's all that happened in daylight. The authorities went absolutely mad to obliterate every single trace of it. The nearby farmer who technically owned the land that the Knott Hill crash happened on was given quite a lot of money and relocated to Ayrshire, according to Sharon. This is me repeating Sharon's research, by the way. So Sharon and I were planning to camp together on Knott Hill, near the cliff face called by the locals Roughton Gill. It's called by the locals Roughton. Now you might get a bit of confusion as to pronunciation because the scientists, the geologists, pronounce it Rafton. That's their guess, R-A-U-G-H, that's their guess. But actually the locals pronounce it Roughton, is what I found out by going there. Round about where the UFO crashed, I found out by going there, Sharon didn't know this, that there's a kind of square of land about 6 feet square. And if you walk into it with a metal knife and fork, the metal knife and fork bang together and you can't separate them, the magnetic force intensifies in metal and you can't separate it unless you walk out of that square of 6 feet. It's a small square, but that's what happens at a particular point up there in Rafton Gill. And it was a local guy that told me about that, which is quite an interesting detail. So I suppose I did a bit of work on that case. Around about 2004, Sharon and I were planning to camp up there. It's just that when that guy, Dr. Richard Stevens, disappeared, the children's doctor disappearing from Pendlebury Children's Hospital. He was a child's blood specialist. It's one of the most mysterious deaths because he's on CCTV footage arriving, putting his coat over the chair. So his coat's left, his car was left, everything was left. His pass to get his security pass to get into the complex, the Children's Hospital complex, was left. I think he leaves in his shirt, and then was found 6 months later, down a cave, dead in Rafton Gill, and was claimed to have, by the police, to have injected himself twice to kill himself. Well, I think that was a very strange death, and obviously quite a lot of people have died mysteriously. And as Tony Dodd when he was alive, and Marky and Birdsall, actually, specifically, he did a bit of work himself on the mysterious deaths of the Marconi plants, agreed that the mysterious deaths were happening at a frequency of about 3 to 4 months. So I'm inclined to think that they knew they were bound to kill somebody. I think they deliberately put the body of Dr. Richard Stevens where they thought Sharon and I were going to camp. That's my honest suspicion, and I've never repeated that to anybody. I think they were hoping to completely destroy me and Sharon by putting that body there, and that's why his body was put there, possibly helicoptered up. If you look at Sharon's photographs on her Facebook page of Rafton Gill, you'll see it's totally bleak, ridiculously bleak. There's not a tree in sight almost. There's maybe a bush or two, and that's it. It's just super. It's like Iceland. I was in Iceland. There's no trees there. Yes?
Do you know anything about Graham Birdsall and his death?
I am suspicious. Yeah, I guess I do think he was murdered. That's my opinion.
And Tony Dodd.
Yes, that's right. I can say something about Tony Dodd's death as well. That's totally unique to my research.
No, they worked together at the Quest International and UFO magazine.
I liked Tony. He was maybe my favourite UFO researcher. He was a good guy. Linda Howe says the same thing. I do meet up with Linda from time to time. I think that's the one ufologist's death I do feel genuinely sad about when I think about it. Graham was okay, but he was a bit troublesome to me and Linda, really. But yeah, I am suspicious of his death. Yes, he'd just been given 30,000 quid by, I think it was Russell Callahan that gave him it. It wasn't from the authorities. I think really the issue is with this that both Sharon and I are the only people that know of a military document that was posted, photocopied and posted to Sharon. And I think it was like just after she'd been given that award by UFO magazine. Y'all know that Sharon Larkin was the first person to be given an award by the British UFO magazine, and was presented it by Graham Birdsall. So in 2002, a military document was posted to Sharon Larkin, and she let me see it. Well, she was absolutely terrified of it, and it seems to refer to her. And she had been threatened to her face as well while she was doing a car boot sale. Somebody walked up to her claiming to be from working with Sellafield and claiming that they were worried about these lead tins that hold atomic rods or whatever, spent nuclear fuel rods. They were going missing, and he walked up to Sharon and said, "Do you know anything about these spent nuclear fuel rods?" While she was manning her car boot sale. And she said no, and then he went, "You better fucking watch it." That's honestly what she experienced. So she got violently threatened. There's no doubt about it. Somebody posted a mysterious military document, and it doesn't actually say we're going to kill Graham Birdsall in it, but it does refer quite mysteriously to we have to do something about Graham Birdsall, basically, is what you would figure out that it's saying. So,
what about Ken Phillips?
Pardon?
Ken Phillips, former editor of BUFORA magazine, also taken out.
I didn't know about that one.
He was taken out, yeah.
I didn't know about that one.
He told me, and he was ash and grey, that they're going to.
I didn't know about that. I can't talk about Tony Dodd's. I always said Ken Dodd. Oh dear. Tony Dodd's death. I can't talk about Graham Birdsall's. I have a Facebook page which is called, which I've called Ufologists Behaving a bit mysteriously, something like that. I'm forgetting the name of my own Facebook page, and I've typed up the contents of the military document that was posted to Sharon Larkin, so you can look at the what was repeated, but there's a lot of blacked out bits, so you have to figure out what's being referred to. So I've not been able to say much or post much on it, but I think it's a worthwhile Facebook page for you to look at. If it might be better if you're really super interested for you to leave names and addresses, and I'll put you on to the ufologists behaving in a mysterious manner. I think that's I've finally remembered it. Ufologists behaving in a suspicious manner is the name of a Facebook page I've created, and I've tried to put good information on that. Okay, Finally,
I was told by a source of spiders in the Lake District, big ones, which took humans, and they were only successfully isolated when the deep caves were literally all blocked off.
Well, I just can't answer about that. I don't know about it. It makes me maybe think there are holographic projections, and they are trying to make people sound silly.
Well, no, it's because of the link with Ron Adams and his terror of spiders. If these things are about 6 feet wide, they'd be fairly terrifying.
Well, I suppose it would be, but I'm inclined to think maybe that they are using technology and hoping that people sound a bit too silly, and that's off-putting and things like that. So I'm a bit wary of what's happening with that. It's probably a holographic projection. I mean, the Robert France incident was totally a holographic thing. But it's that the Robert France thing, which I am filmed talking about, was basically it seemed like a human being living in Reading, but a hell of a lot of people in Reading saw Robert France suddenly become a small alien grey and then shift back to being a human. But so many people saw the same guy shapeshift like that it became a bit of a case. That is the Robert France case. And that is who I interacted with over Facebook. He joined me on Facebook, and he talked to me more as a grey than as a human over Facebook. But I think the Robert Franz case is a case of a grey using a holographic technology to make itself look like a human being, and all the time it is like a small alien grey. Robert Franz, I did see him. He stopped and said hello at a conference. I did see him. He's about 5'7", stocky build, jet black hair, dark clothes, but I mean, he looked like a total human, a witty guy, a really nice guy. You would have liked meeting him. I did watch him do a talk. He did an absolutely fascinating talk at a UFO Society meeting for BUFORA, around about 92, 93. I was lucky to see him. And he liked my talk about his shape-shifting, which I thought was really quite funny. So he contacted me over Facebook about 13 years later or something, and I was completely incredulous, and nobody knew what had happened with Robert Franz. We all thought he just disappeared because of all the fuss and kerfuffle that kicked up. And right-wing fascist types were scrawling shit all over his walls and stuff, all over the walls of the house where he was staying with a 65-year-old woman called Sheila Yeoman. So, like, he disappeared for a long time. Then all of a sudden, I'm aware of him asking to join me on Facebook, which was like unbelievably sublime and bizarre and like incredibly normal. And before I know it, I'm sitting more interacting with a grey. So that's the closest I've come really to like talking to an extraterrestrial. I believe it happened. People like Philip Mansell and David Clark and Andy Roberts can exploit that very easily, but I think it had happened. And it was during that exchange, I was heavily into Sonic Youth then, and I think you have to be a bit more of a musician to enjoy a band like Sonic Youth. If you know the band I'm talking about, do you agree? They play a dissonant chord throughout all their music. That's why quite a lot of people wouldn't like listening to them. So like you have to be a little bit bigger on your sonic experiences if you like Sonic Youth. And I just wasn't to say, I'm going to see some bands, but I'm going to see Lee Ronaldo or something, who's the former lead guitarist, and he does his solo thing, and I mentioned all that, I was mentioning all my personal things, and I got this vibe of Robert pretending he could hear. And I remembered back to the blind guy when I was a child, pretending he could see forests where there was nothing but concrete houses. And it felt incredibly similar. So I didn't experience the grey as super intelligent. I could categorize the intelligence level. I would say, if I think back to my 6th year school friends, when I was doing 6th year studies in English literature, I would say when they were expecting me to like be a big famous writer and thought I had a really good literary style, thought I'd be a big writer, that the standard of intelligence of the grey that was hiding inside the image of Robert Franz was kind of the same as the average 6th former pupil. If that's my categorization, if you are all aware, I suppose a lot of you have had children and they've been in their 6th year at school. That feeling of that average, quite good intelligence, but not extra. It's kind of like, and I've refused.
Parallel thinking.
Yeah, and I've refused 2 publication offers. So, my writing's quite highly thought of by people who read it. And I would say, even though without wanting it to sound big-headed, when when literature degree students read writers like Hermann Hesse or André Gide or Dostoevsky, I feel like one of those writers, and I feel superior to them, the people reading. And that's what Robert Franz felt like to me. I could categorize the alien grey's intelligence. Basically, I would say I was more intelligent than the alien grey. And it was surprised by my intelligence, as I said things quite surprising to it. And it was going, how did you think that? And I would explain why I thought that. And he said, gee, you're really perceptive. And I felt like, I was like, James Joyce to the English literature would be to the English literature students at Edinburgh
Dave,
University.
we've got to wind it up.
Okay.
It's an excellent presentation from Dave Moncoeur. Thank you very, very much indeed. We'll take a break and meet back in 15 minutes, and we'll start the experiencer session. We've got a couple of experiencers who've had dramatic events, and we've got a good luck story, a happy story. We're going to start off then, and anybody else who wants to speak, do get in contact with me. And that will be it for the day. We must be out here by 7.